Okay. I came into natural history because I liked being in the country. All right. I liked walking among flowers and mosses and trees and just enjoying what they looked like. Now, in the process, your curiosity is engendered because you want to know what these things are. All right. And there are lots of places you can find this out. But when I was out in the country with my friends, if you like, botanizing, then we didn't use terms like biodiversity. You know, it's a kind of a term that's used by scientists. Now, I'm not saying that the friends that I'm with are not scientists, because they are, because they do a lot of study on the distribution of animals and plants. But we don't use terms like biodiversity. So perhaps I better explain what biodiversity is. Well, that's it. It's a contraction of two words, biological and diversity. Well, that's fairly simple. Or it's the number of species there are in an area or habitat. It could also be called species richness. Right? But it's not just the numbers of the species. It is also the relative amounts of the species. And it's the structure of the habitat in which these species are living. It involves the relationship between one species and another. And we are one of those species as well. So whatever comes out of what we do to maintain biodiversity, it does depend on us having an input and the effect it has on us. Now, some habitats are very rich in species can be dominated by one or two species. Let's take a familiar example, one which you are all familiar with because you pass it and drive alongside every day, and that's grass verges. Now, grass verges can be a very rich habitat for plants. And because they are a rich habitat for plants, they're also a rich habitat for insects and other invertebrates. And because they're rich in those, birds depend on them, and they are enriched by their presence. Now, because of either neatness or road safety, grass verges are cut and mown regularly. It often pains me to see the results of that. All right? Now, if you mow or cut a grass verge too early in the season, you'll remove all the seed heads, all the flowers, and you will not have regeneration of flowering plants. The flowering plants which make the grass verges good habitats to be in. It's all right for grasses. If you cut grasses, all the growing points are down to ground level, so they go up again. So constant cutting at the wrong time of year will result in a rank vegetation, perhaps just all grasses. Right? If you cut right back to the hedge, it does the same. Now, most local authorities have good regimes, right? They have good guidelines on how to carry out this trimming of the grass verges. Local authorities themselves don't always carry that out because they contract out to other people to do it. And not all contractors will keep to the timetable, right? They perhaps don't wait until the flowers have seeded and drop the seed on the ground. Right? They've done too early. There's usually a regime of cutting about a metre back just after flowering, and then 2 metres back right at the end of the year, so everything is cut off. All right? That's the usual regime. Lots of contractors will do that, but there are some that don't still. Now, an extreme case of very few species growing in an area is the monoculture of arable land, agriculture, where you've deliberately got one species growing over the whole field. Right? Now, that's because of a good reason. It's to produce an increased production of the wheat, the corn, whatever, so that we can eat. Right? That's the simple reason. But the decline of the species which would normally fill an arable field has gone. At one time, there would be an awful lot of naturally occurring flowering plants in among the wheat, in among the corn, the oats, and at the sides. But if you use a lot of herbicides, they all disappear. What can we do? Well, there are schemes afoot now which will reverse that. We've got stewardship schemes in farms which will allow the farmer, with some compensation, to leave part of the land untreated. So headlands is where the plough goes up and then turns round. At the end of a plough land, the headland, about 5 metres in depth, that can be left untreated. Now in those areas we are getting arable weeds, weeds in inverted commas, arable weeds, the cornfield plants, re-establishing themselves. They can't do it naturally all the time. There is a seed bank in the soil, and if you leave the soil untreated, that seed bank will germinate in the right conditions, particularly if you cultivate the land as well, but don't crop it. Now, I've got a friend called Chris Wilson. He's a farmer and a botanist friend from Howard Dale area, and he's in charge of a project for re-establishing arable weeds in farms. And if you went to Silfo, you'd see an example of that, where you've got beautiful plants growing on the side. They haven't just come up from seed, they've been planted there as well, because one of the jobs he has is to collect seed, grow it on in pots, sometimes in his own back garden, sometimes in my back garden, sometimes in lots of friends' back gardens, right, and greenhouses. And then when the plants have grown up, pass them along to him, and he has volunteers who go out and re-establish these plants. It's intervention, isn't it? But we produced the situation in the first place. I see no problem in intervening to put things back the way they were at one time. Mosses and liverworts. I don't know what that means anything to. You probably know mosses from the fact that they are something we have to remove from lawns, right, or driveways. So your sort of experience of mosses and liverworts could well be something to get rid of. But they're very delicate plants, and they're good indicators of the environment. Because they're very thin-walled leaves and stems, they react very, very quickly to changes in the environment. So they're good indicators. Those found in arable fields, to get back to those again, is that they have a very short life cycle. They're adapted to living between one crop and the next. Now that if you have spring sowing, you've got plenty of time after the cropping in the summer for the mosses to establish themselves, grow up, produce spores. The spores go in the ground and then germinate again. Autumn planting removes that possibility. Right. So winter stubble fields that used to be a feature of our landscape have all but disappeared. You go along the road now, just take a road along the Romtus Bay, which many have taken, fields on the side are replanted almost already. As soon as the crops come in the summer, there's only a matter of weeks before it's ploughed up, reseeded, and you've got winter wheat growing up again. There's no room for arable mosses and liverworts. You know, their habitat is disappearing. And but it's changing. In some parts of this country, we're getting less and fewer examples of winter stubble not being left. So we're seeing more winter stubble fields coming along. Now, as a consequence of biodiversity, the need to have a wide diversity of plants, we need to have a regime which will help to conserve them. But first of all, why conserve them? Right? What are good reasons for conserving a wide range of species? Well, first of all, we don't know much about lots of them. We don't know their properties or qualities. Some may have, as we've heard in the last talk, medicinal properties, but there are other food properties they may have. Because lots and lots of plants haven't been studied, lots of animals haven't been studied, we may lose them before we know what they can do. Right? And that would be a tragedy. In the past, I think people knew more about their natural environment because they're in closer contact with it. Fewer are in contact with nature now than there used to be. Hopefully that is starting to change. There are lots of TV programs which encourage people to, in fact, take part in their local environment and to study plants and animals. I think this week is the start of a Hug a Tree Week or something very similar, isn't it? I heard just yesterday morning that people are encouraged to go out into woodlands and enjoy the serenity of the woodlands. It's something I used to do with youngsters years ago. I used to run field centre, right? And we one morning just walking down into the woods, not with identification skills, that wasn't important. We just sat them down. Right now then, you're miles from anywhere, just sit in the quiet and experience what we experience. You look up, look around. It's a bit like a cathedral in a big wood, isn't it? You've got tree trunks going up, they're arching over, and it's quiet. And that in itself has a wonderful effect on your emotions. And you can take that away with you. All right? You don't know any of the names. But in some situations, names are important. Very important. We need to know what it is that we're telling someone else about. Identification skills are not something which is taught very much and very often these days. David Bellamy will tell you that. Part of his job was to teach students how to name things. That was part of it, wasn't it? Huh? Where are those identification skills now? Lots of universities don't teach taxonomy anymore. Schools, because of their curriculum restraints, don't teach it very much. So where do you get the information from? You get it from enthusiastic amateurs. All right? You go to the local natural history club, all right? Which is a group of enthusiastic people who are very knowledgeable. Some are professionals, but most of them are not. They know the names and the places to find all the interesting things. And there's nothing like being next to and with an expert for learning how to name things. Got a whole range of books there with keys and pictures and all sorts of things to help identify fungi and mosses and whatever. But there's nothing quite like going up with David Bellamy, or to a less extent myself. All right? Sitting next to Nellie was always a good way of learning a task, wasn't it? And it hasn't changed. After you've got your initial hurdles over about identifying things, then you can go back with your specimens, get your books out, and go through the keys. It's very helpful if you know the name before you go through the keys. It means you can find your way very easily. And the next time you go through, it's easier. Okay? Right. How am I doing for time? Am I over? Finished? Well, I've got 6 pages left. Right. That'll have to do for another time, won't it? But if anyone wants to read the rest of this, welcome. Okay. If you want to join a Natural History Society, we have one in Whitby. It's a very active one. Next year, we are having a BioBlitz in Whitby, which is a 24-hour recording of all the animals and plants in the area. We'll have experts on all sorts of groups of organisms. It'll be run from Planet Museum on the 22nd of June. This is a preliminary information giving of this. It will hopefully encourage you to get involved with natural history. But in the meantime, there's lots of opportunity between now and then to do it, because you can observe things while you're outside anyway. And if you want to contact people, you can do it through me. If you want to know the names of things, you can contact through me. And the best of British luck. Thank you.